James Butler Hickok, better known as Wild Bill Hickok, was one of the most iconic names of the Wild West. His legendary figure is synonymous with bravery, epic shootouts, and a fearless personality. Born in 1837 in Illinois, Wild Bill would become an American cultural icon, remembered not only for his exceptional skills with firearms but also for the impact he had on small towns in the West, where law and order were fragile. He was not just a gunslinger. He was a figure who represented the fight for justice in a land where rules were scarce and violence was constant. His rise to legendary status occurred through a series of remarkable feats. Wild Bill was, at different points in his life, a scout, a soldier, a sheriff, and even an actor in traveling shows. Each of these facets helped build the myth that surrounded him until the end of his days. As a gunslinger, it was nearly impossible to find anyone who could rival him. His skill with firearms, particularly with revolvers, was legendary, and he came to be feared and admired, especially in towns like Abilene, where he served as sheriff. But what really made Wild Bill stand out was his ability to enforce law and order in a place where bandits ruled. Despite his formidable reputation, Hickok also had a complex nature. His friends and allies saw him as someone with strong principles, someone who fought for justice, but his life was far from simple. There was always a shadow of violence following him. Many of the stories about him spoke of his ability to face any risky situation without hesitation, but there were also moments when he showed a sense of honor and loyalty rarely seen in men of his time. This, in turn, heightened his mystique and made his actions even more fascinating to those who admired him. However, what truly cemented his place in history was how he would face his own death. Wild Bill Hickok would not die in battle, as many imagined. Instead, he would be struck down by betrayal at a moment of total vulnerability while playing poker in a saloon in Deadwood, a town he had barely paid attention to. His tragic and mysterious death, in a way, would put an end to his legend, but also open up a series of unanswered questions. The true motivation behind his murder remains a mystery to this day. The name Wild Bill would come to symbolize not only courage but also an enigmatic death that would raise questions for generations. James Butler Hickok was born in 1837 in Illinois, the son of a farming family. From a young age, Wild Bill showed a restless spirit, seeking more than the simple life offered by agriculture. The nature of the West, with its wild expanse, seemed to call to him. Through accounts of his early years, we know that he had an early taste for adventure, something that would guide him to become one of the most famous characters of the Wild West. His skill with firearms emerged early in life, when he began hunting to help his family, developing a remarkable proficiency with pistols and rifles. In his early adulthood, Hickok enlisted in the Army during the American Civil War. Although his military career was brief, this experience helped shape the man he would become, introducing him to the chaos of combat and the reality of a war-torn world. His skill with firearms, already notable, was honed during this time. But it wasn't just armed conflict that shaped his destiny. The war took him to several states in the West, where he would blend into a culture in turmoil, full of tension, uncertainty, and, of course, violence. After the war, Wild Bill began to make a name for himself in other areas. He was hired as a scout, helping to track down outlaws and other fugitives from the law. His first big claim to fame came when he had a series of encounters with criminals, culminating in the capture of outlaws in various towns. He quickly became known as a man capable of handling any situation and emerging victorious with his piercing gaze and unwavering courage. At the time, his fame spread quickly, becoming one of the most respected and feared figures of the West, someone able to restore order in a place where the law was little more than a distant idea. Hickok's proficiency with firearms led him to a unique position in his time. He wasn't just a gunslinger. He was a man with a deep sense of justice, who believed in the enforcement of the law, even if it meant confronting it in dangerous and unpredictable moments. Wild Bill would soon establish himself as a central figure in the Wild West, with a reputation that would only grow as he became involved in violent, heroic confrontations. But behind this invincible facade, there were already signs of a life in constant internal conflict, something that would become increasingly evident as his life story unfolded. As Wild Bill Hickok established himself as a central figure in the Wild West, his legend only grew stronger. One of his first great victories was his role as sheriff in the town of Abilene, Kansas, at a time when violence and crime were rampant. In the small towns of the West, the presence of a man like Wild Bill meant a chance to restore order. In Abilene, he had to face notorious outlaws, gang confrontations, and widespread disorder. His skills with pistols were feared, but what made him even more respected was his unwavering sense of justice. Hickok did not tolerate senseless violence, and was relentless in dealing with those who disrespected the law. However, Wild Bill's leadership as sheriff came at a high price. Abilene, like many towns in the West, was saturated with dangerous characters who were not afraid to challenge authority. During his time as sheriff, Hickok had to make tough decisions and often found himself in fatal confrontations. The fight against anarchy became a matter of survival, where the line between hero and villain was not always clear. His approach to resolving conflicts was direct and uncompromising, which made him gain both enemies and admirers. Recognition of his skill in armed confrontations was absolute. The most famous shootout, and perhaps the most emblematic of his career, was the duel with Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri. This confrontation helped solidify Wild Bill's reputation as one of the greatest gunslingers of the West. The duel occurred because of a personal dispute between the two men, but the way Hickok emerged victorious with deadly accuracy became legendary. For many, this shootout is the ultimate representation of what the Wild West was. Life or death duels, where the skill of shooting could decide a man's fate in seconds. Over time, Wild Bill's image as a hero of the West began to spread. He became a legendary figure, known for his courage, firearm skills, and, in a way, his loyalty to a strict moral code. His fame transcended the borders of the towns he visited, and soon he would become an essential figure not just for the Wild West, but for the creation of the mystique surrounding the Wild West in the popular imagination. However, not everything in Hickok's life was destined to be a hero's story. The very nature of the West, with its conflicts and betrayals, would soon begin to take its toll. After consolidating his fame as a gunslinger and sheriff, Wild Bill Hickok entered a new phase of his life, far from the law and imminent violence. He joined the Wild West circuit an environment where talent and legends were exploited for the entertainment of the public. This phase was marked by a series of performances in the Wild West show, directed by Buffalo Bill Cody, one of the biggest names in Western history. The traveling show, which brought together artists, hunters, and Western celebrities, was a mix of skill demonstrations, dramatizations, and competitions, where Hickok became a central attraction. During these years, Wild Bill transformed into an even more mythical figure. He was no longer just a man facing outlaws, but a hero of the spectacle, whose firearm skills were choreographed to entertain the audience. He became a sort of superhero of the West, but with the harsh reality that life on stage was never quite the same as real life. Hickok was beginning to feel the weight of his own fame, which made him reflect on his place in the world. However, life in the shows offered something he could no longer find in the small towns of the West: financial stability and a temporary sense of security. Even in the midst of the show, his reputation as an unbeatable shot still followed him, and he did not hesitate to showcase his skills whenever the occasion arose. One of the most remarkable moments of his participation in the shows was when he had to demonstrate his talent live, competing in shooting contests against other renowned marksmen. The idea of becoming an entertainment star did not fully detach him from his true nature, and he still had the temperament and courage of a man from the West. However, while his image as a hero solidified on stage, the reality of the West was still calling him back. The rodeo circuit could not protect him forever. He knew that his fame had limits, and that the true violence of the West, with its betrayals and conflicts, was still lurking. Life on stage was just a temporary escape for a man who had devoted his life to being a lawman and bounty hunter. Wild Bill's transition from a living hero to a stage hero marked a turning point in which he would move from a living legend to an entertainment legend. As time passed, Wild Bill Hickok began to face the struggles of aging. His fame as a gunslinger and hero was well established, but he was far from immune to the realities of the Wild West. The shine of youth began to fade, and the immortality of his legend was replaced by a life marked by losses and hardships. The life of adventure seemed no longer as appealing as it once had been. Wild Bill became more introspective, reflecting on what it really meant to be a legend in a world that was rapidly changing. Moreover, financial instability was a constant in his life. Despite his fame, Hickok could not achieve the stability many thought he would have. He faced financial troubles, leading him to make decisions that did not align with his image as a hero. At several points, the myth of the unwavering and fearless hero was replaced by a man searching for some kind of peace in a world where violence and uncertainty still ruled. The life of adventure that had made him famous now seemed like a distant shadow. Over the years, Wild Bill also suffered from the effects of a life of confrontations and the weight of fame. His personal relationships, especially with figures like Calamity Jane, began to deteriorate. While he had been a great friend and partner to Jane, their interactions were often complex, and both were marked by loneliness and the scars of life. In the West, their friendship, though true in many ways, was immersed in a common pursuit of recognition and survival, no longer driven by the glory of it all. With this, Wild Bill's solitude intensified, and he seemed increasingly distant from those around him. Even so, Wild Bill never fully abandoned the image of the hero. He continued to be admired by many, but his own internal dilemmas and the circumstances of life made him question whether there was still a place for him in a West that was growing more wild and unpredictable. He knew that the West was no longer the same as when he had first started. The morality and values of his time were being challenged, and his personal struggle to find purpose in a transforming world became increasingly evident. The decline of Wild Bill Hickok's life was not just the end of a man, but the end of an era. In August 1876, Wild Bill Hickok was in Deadwood, a town in the Dakota Territory that was still a land of promise, but also marked by anarchy and the absence of firm authority. He found himself in a transitional moment, far from the great battles and confrontations that had made him famous. Deadwood, with its dusty streets and crowded saloons, was a place where men sought fortune, and the law seemed to be a relative matter. It was here, amid this chaos, that Hickok's fate would be sealed in such a mysterious and tragic way. On the night of his death, Wild Bill was seated at a poker table in the saloon No. 10, playing cards. It was an apparently ordinary scene, an experienced and shrewd man in a game of cards. But the truth was, he was in a moment of great vulnerability. Wild Bill had been warned about the presence of potentially dangerous men in the town, and the fact that he was sitting with his back to the door put him in a very risky position. But this was not the kind of man to be shaken by such dangers. On the contrary, he was accustomed to facing risk head-on. Then the unexpected happened. A man named Jack McCall, who would later become known for his betrayal and the murder of Hickok, entered the saloon and, without warning, fired a single bullet to Wild Bill's head. The death was instant. The shocking scene was marked by complete silence, with the poker players and the saloon patrons in utter disbelief. Wild Bill Hickok, the man who had defied the West, the unbeatable gunslinger, fell to the ground, mortally wounded, in one of the most enigmatic and cruel deaths the Wild West had ever known. Hickok's murder sparked a series of speculations. Some theories claimed that McCall killed him out of revenge after a personal dispute, while others believed the motive was tied to deeper issues, such as greed or the desire to become famous by killing a legend. The truth behind what drove McCall to commit the murder was never fully clarified. Wild Bill's death seemed to be an enigma, and the lack of a clear explanation only intensified the mystery surrounding his legend. Hickok died with a hand of aces and eights, a gesture that became an immortal symbol of his death. He left this world in a manner as mystical as the life he led. The murder of Wild Bill Hickok deeply shocked the town of Deadwood and quickly spread throughout the West. The figure of Wild Bill, who represented justice and the power of firearms, was brutally and impersonally brought down, and his death left a feeling of emptiness and outrage among those who admired him. It was hard to comprehend how such an unbeatable and respected man could be taken down so easily without even having the chance to defend himself. Hickok was killed in a situation where his skill with pistols, his fame, and his courage couldn't help him, which shocked not only the people of Deadwood, but also everyone who saw him as a hero. Immediately after the death, theories about the motive behind the murder began to surface. Many believed that Jack McCall, the murderer, was driven by revenge. McCall had a personal dispute with Hickok, who supposedly had humiliated him in a previous poker game. However, Wild Bill's murder was more than just a bar fight or personal revenge. The fact that McCall acted so coldly and calculatingly without any warning made many begin to question if there was something more behind this act. The treacherous nature of Hickok's death raised the possibility that he had been the victim of a more elaborate plan, something beyond the simple anger of a defeated man. After Hickok's death, McCall was captured, but the trial that followed was marked by controversy. Although he was convicted for the murder, McCall's motive was never fully clarified, which left even more questions unanswered about what happened that night. The lack of a clear explanation about why Wild Bill was killed left an open wound. In Western history, many people could not accept that the death of a legend like Hickok was the result of mere revenge or a trivial matter. The absence of a clear motive for the crime became, in the minds of many, part of the mystery surrounding Wild Bill's life and death. Over time, the story of Wild Bill Hickok's murder became one of the greatest mysteries of the West. The act, a betrayal and the murder of a hero, turned into a legend in itself. The way Hickok died without a chance to react, with the cards in his hands and his mind full of doubts, became a symbol not only of his death, but of a West where even the greatest heroes could be consumed by violence and betrayal. The immediate impact of his death was a shock, not only to the people of Deadwood, but to everyone who still believed in the idea of justice and honor in the Wild West. After his death, Wild Bill Hickok's legacy became one of the most iconic legends of the Wild West. The way he lived and died continued to inspire stories, songs, movies, and books, perpetuating his image as a tragic and indomitable hero. His figure became synonymous with courage, skill with firearms, and an unwavering moral code, characteristics that ensured him an eternal place in the collective imagination. Even after his death, the name Wild Bill Hickok still resonated among those who lived in the West and among generations that followed. Hickok's legend also served to represent a time of transition in the American West. His death, so brutal and mysterious, marked the end of an era where justice could be enforced with the strength of a pistol. The West was changing, towns were growing, and the law was beginning to gain more power. But to this day, the image of Wild Bill, as the man who represented resistance against corruption and tyranny in the West, continues to resonate. His death not only ended the life of a hero, but also sealed his condition as a myth, immortalizing him in a way no other death could dot in the years that followed. The murdered Hickok would become the central figure of countless narratives, some closer to reality, others more distorted, but all maintained the spirit of the man who dared to defy the system. His death became one of the greatest turning points in the creation of Wild West mythology. The aces and eights hand he held at his death became a symbol representing not just the end of a life, but the continuation of the legend that always accompanied him. However, more than the stories that followed, the true strength of Wild Bill Hickok's legacy lies in the way he represented the spirit of the West, a place where honor, justice, and betrayal were often intertwined, where heroes and villains blurred. He was not just a man of guns. He was a figure whose life and death encapsulated the complexities of an era. Wild Bill Hickok remains a reference, not only for those who study the history of the West, but for all who seek to understand the impact of legends on the construction of our own culture.